Same old game. Here's Johnny.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
So serious.
Roll out.
I am Iron Man. This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the InSession Film Podcast.
Welcome to episode 131 for August 23rd, 2015. And I got a great gift from Brendan this weekend, and I'm JD Duran.
Unfortunately, I also came with a hangover.
A little bit.
Yeah, I can relate.
Well, thanks for joining us this week, everybody. We do have a really great show in store. Before we get into any of that, though, Brendan, of course, we got to talk about Friday night because you came down from Louisville to visit. I went out for my birthday, was celebrating with some really close friends, a couple of weeks late, but we finally got a chance to do that. And we had a late night. It was a fun night. That's about all I can admit on air, but it was wonderful. It was very good.
Karaoke was still involved, as well as a few other, as well as a few other typical guys' night shenanigans. I guess we'll just leave it at that. But it was a good time. I was glad to be there for it, man.
Well, what was your karaoke song of choice? I must know.
Another One Bites the Dust by Queen.
Oh.
Yeah. And
that's a great one.
And he was really into it. He was very good. It was really funny to watch. That was the first time I'd ever seen him do it. So
it was not. I didn't really like that bar as much, though. I've had better karaoke experiences in other places in Lexington, but it was still fun to, hurt myself singing as I usually do.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. I had a blast, and I was very thankful for you to be there, Brennan, and all those guys there. It was a heck of a time, so it was very
absolutely
good
stuff. Wasn't gonna miss it, man.
Other than that, though, Brendan, how was your week, man?
It was, most of it was really just me kind of recouping after that whole night more than anything else. There were a lot of music festivals going on in Kentucky yesterday. We had Crave in Lexington, and even in Louisville, there was the 7 Cents Festival going on as well. And I was just way too, quote-unquote, sick from all the milk and cookies to do any of that. And I felt guilty because I felt like I should have done some of those things, but I just needed to relax. And, the Friday night shenanigans were worth it for that. So at least there was something I did.
Yeah, man. Yeah. I'm completely with you because not only was there the Crave stuff in Lexington, but there was also a bunch of food stuff happening downtown. And it was a gorgeous day yesterday. It was absolutely gorgeous.
Not too hot, not too humid for once.
It was great. But I'm like you, though. I'm just sitting there going, I just kind of want to relax today. I just got to recover a little bit. So I just kind of hung out with Dakota all afternoon and then hung out with the wife after she got home from work.
Yeah, probably for the best. And plus, I still had an hour drive back.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
After that, I was like, I can go to bed now. I had a nice date night last night with my good girlfriend Netflix.
Oh yeah, there you go. So.
That's the best girlfriend right there.
I agree.
Absolutely. Well, without further ado, let's bring on this week's guest, as you've heard his voice a couple times in the background now. But joining us once again is Justin from the Walking Naked podcast. Justin, thanks for joining us once again, man.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm glad to be here. And I've got to ask, I don't know how old either one of you are. Are you past 30 yet?
Well, I just turned the big 30, so I'm officially old now.
Oh, well, congratulations on hitting 30, and happy late birthday.
Thank you.
The hangovers just get worse.
That's what I keep
from
hearing.
there. Yeah, I felt like the day I turned 30, the next morning I was like, what is going on? I can't understand this right now. Yeah, so I totally understand the not wanting to do much the next day. It's just stay inside and try to put a towel over your face. Yeah, it's rough.
Well, that makes me feel guilty because I'm the baby of this group.
You are.
I'm only 25. I'll be 26 next month.
That's okay. You have a long time ahead of you, Brendan.
Yeah,
many more years to go.
But keep in mind, I lost count of how many drinks I had on Friday night. So there were too many to warrant.
We had a lot of free drinks too, which was just the worst.
You had more than anyone else because I kept buying your drinks.
Yeah, and we had some friends kind of hook us up near the end of the night, which was kind of also early morning, I guess. So.
It kind of was still, yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. It was kind of funny, Justin, because after we had breakfast / lunch, by the time we woke up, it was noon. And afterwards, I was kind of joking around with a friend of mine because I was like, because he's 30 as well. And we were like, man, I'm certainly old and I'm certainly feeling it. I was like, we'll just do this once every 10 years and it'll progressively get worse. So.
Yeah, if you're waiting 10 years to do it, I can only imagine how bad it would be for sure. Sounds like you guys had, was it the Varsity Blues moment where they come out of they were in a strip club, actually, I believe.
Yeah, oh yeah.
It's been a long time since I've seen that movie, but that's the first thing that came to mind was just when they roll out of there early morning.
Early morning, yeah.
And I've been there before, and you just, it's the absolute worst. Nothing good happens after 2 a.m., but you still do it. It's still fun until the next morning, and you want to hurt yourself. So
that's very true. Some bad things could happen, but it could also be a gift. And with that transition,
dude, really,
let's talk about what we're doing on the show this week, because we are going to be talking about.
Did you write that one down?
No, I did. I completely made that up. You're welcome.
You sly dog.
Yes. But we are going to be talking about Joel Edgerton's The Gift, and going off of that, we're going to be talking about our top 3 movie stalkers in film. And for our discussion segment, we were planning on kind of doing a little review of The Man from U.N.C.L.E, but Brendan was the only one that got a chance to go see that. So what we're going to do is we're going to give Brendan the space to kind of talk about The Man from U.N.C.L.E a little bit, but we're also going to talk about a few other films from 2015 that we haven't talked about on this show yet or given a proper review. So we're going to do a little bit of a few mini reviews at the end of the show. So all that being said, guys, a lot to talk about. Let's get into it.
And here we go.
You're listening to the InSession Film Podcast. This is episode 131. Brendan, you think you're done with the past, but the past is not done with you.
You didn't say Simon Says.
Beautiful wife and a new home. Well, see, should have no problem starting a family. Because he's Simon Says. Yeah. Ah, God. I have one too many wives. I just talk way too much.
No.
What's been going on with you?
Okay.
What's happened to you since high school? Everything good?
Military. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, it's true. Military, straight out of school. 2 tours. And then I got out of there. And, it's just then I've done a lot of things. But, a lot has happened to me since we last saw each other. Some good, some bad, like life, mostly good. But, I believe that a lot of the good could come from the bad,
I hear you.
If you put the right faith behind it. Not to bring religion into it, God, but just to say that the bad things, they can be a gift.
All right, The Gift is written and directed by Joel Edgerton and stars Jason Bateman, Rebecca Hall, Joel Edgerton, and a few other people here and there. Let's toss it to you first, Justin. What did you think about The Gift?
I actually really enjoyed it. And the funniest thing about this movie is I just watched it today. I've had a nice little morning/afternoon of psychological thrillers because this morning I made my girlfriend watch Fear for the very first time. She had never seen it before in her life. And then I took her to I dragged her to the movies to watch The Gift, and she proceeded to watch the movie with a coat over her face. Almost throughout the entire movie. I think it was very tense in certain moments, but overall it wasn't it wasn't that scary. I tried to explain this to her while we were watching it, but she's like, I can't do it. I'm not going to watch this. But I liked it a lot. I thought it was a fun movie. I thought it was actually very well written for one thing. Besides the movie and just everything that was, very tense about it and kind of scary and very cool ending. But to make me hate Jason Bateman, I would have to say that Joel Edgerton did a very good job of writing that character.
Sure.
Because I love Jason Bateman,
Yeah, sure.
and I absolutely despised him in this movie. So I'm tipping my hat to Joel Edgerton because that was a good job on his part.
Okay, what about you, Brendan?
Says a lot about Jason Bateman's performance, because I would argue it may be the best performance of his career. I think from he disappears instantly in this role, and so does Joel Edgerton for the most part too. And Justin, one thing you were talking about, with your wife having the hood on throughout the entire duration of this film, and you talked about the film's how tense the film is, because the first thing I wrote down, especially regarding the first half of this movie, is Joel Edgerton as a director did a very good thing in creating a film that was very subtly intense, which is such an odd juxtaposition with those two kind of words, because they mean polar opposites. I've never seen a film that could be so intense yet so subtle. Somehow he did that.
Yeah.
Somehow he did that. And I had to applaud him for that. However, I really think by the second half of this film, it does veer into conventional thriller territory for me. And while I didn't hate the movie, it's certainly much better than any conventional thriller you get within this genre, because you've got A-list actors giving A-list performances. As a director, Joel Edgerton does some pretty unique things here. And the movie does have something to say. I think there's a lot of interesting notions that we can take from this, and we'll get to those things later. But I like that the film is about something that we can all relate to. But I do think it does veer very much into convention by the second half. There are some scare tactics that I think that Edgerton throws in there that kind of took me out of the film. The ending didn't work for me, unfortunately. I think it took away a lot of the emotional resonance that I kind of had with the film, especially regarding the character that it revolves around. But I don't want to get too much into that for the sake of spoilers. So while I was disappointed with the film, I don't think it's quite as good as the reviews are saying. I think there's enough good things here for me to still recommend it, and especially with the first half. The first half, what Joel Edgerton does is astonishing for this genre, so I did like it overall.
Well, finally, this is going to be pretty exciting, Brendan, because we've been agreeing a lot lately, and I've been looking forward to a good disagreement, and this is a great film, I think, to jump into that, because I will completely disagree with you. I think the first half is the more mundane and tedious part, and I really liked the second half, and the ending especially. I'll get more into this here in a little bit, but I think the final 2 or 3 minutes is probably some of my favorite filmmaking I've seen all year. Getting back to Joel Edgerton himself here for a second, of course, this is his directorial debut, and I do think he is pretty serviceable here as a director. There are some horror elements that you guys are talking about that are thrown in here, a couple jump scares, which was really funny. I actually laughed out loud during some of those jump scares because it really got our audience, and everybody kind of lost their minds a little bit. So I found that pretty hilarious. But with those jump scares, I thought they did play into the robbing character's paranoia a little bit. And I thought they were pretty well timed, so I didn't have as much a problem with them personally. And while I liked his direction, I completely agree with you, Justin, that I really liked his script. I think he kind of channels a little bit of Hitchcock, a little bit of Michael Haneke in his film Caché specifically is what I kept remembering when I was watching this.
Good comparison.
Especially in the sense of how there's these creepy events that are connected to the husband character in both of these films. And while it does play with some conventional tropes that you're talking about, Brendan, I really liked the heart of it. I think the mystery is intriguing. Each character had their own set of problems that they had to work through. And thematically, there's some really great stuff here about past trauma and its side effects that we'll get into. My biggest criticism of the movie, just real fast, and then I'll toss it back to you, Justin, is some of the middle act especially got a bit too tedious for me. I do think that it does pay off a little bit later in the film's climax, but it felt a little bit too extended and a little bit too repetitive for me. And overall, while this is a standard thriller, I thought it was executed pretty well, and I had a pretty satisfying experience with it.
Yeah, I was just going to say, for me, overall, I really enjoyed the movie, and I think you were talking about the middle part of the film kind of slowing down for you a little bit. but I don't know what it was, but I really enjoyed that part of the movie. I think it really helped build that I don't know, it wasn't like necessarily a creepiness factor to the film, but it was so weird to me to see that this character just kind of goes away. He kind of floats away from Jason Bateman's character. I have to apologize. I don't remember everybody's name. Simon and Robin. He kind of goes away from their lives, and they live. They're just living their lives. Nothing's going on. But we do see that this Robin character, she has this. I don't know if it's a debilitating. I don't know if she has a disease. We don't really ever get into what exactly it was that happened in Chicago, right?
Yeah.
But we notice that this character, Joel Edgerton's Gordo, he brings all of this back to her, and I just really like the fact that he wasn't really in the film at all. In the middle, I guess it was probably like the middle part of the movie, maybe 20 minutes or so, that he wasn't really a factor in the film.
Sure.
But because of Robin's paranoia, he was always constantly there. So I really enjoyed that part about it. The final 2 to 3 minutes, I will agree with you, JD. I thought it was fantastic. It was, you have these moments. I don't want to, and I know we're going to get into it, I guess, a little bit later as far as spoilery section, but it just reminded me, you go back to things that you've done in life, and you wonder if they will ever come back to haunt you. Things that you said, things that you did, that kind of stuff. And I just thought it was so satisfying how those final minutes concluded in the movie. So I think that's all of my thoughts that I will get into if we get into any spoilery moments with the ending.
And kind of to jump off of that, maybe this might kind of help, I guess, with your criticisms about the middle act, JD, because it does. There are moments from a narrative standpoint that it kind of goes into a little bit about something that Jason Bateman's character Simon is doing regarding his work that involves another character that has a very brief appearance, and those things are where I can agree it started to slow down a bit, because I felt like that kind of leads to a certain reveal that didn't add a whole lot of anything new for me, and I don't know if that's where some of the tediness maybe came from for you, JD. But I guess I don't know if we're going to get into spoilers or not, but yeah, it's like the ending just really, unfortunately, didn't really work for me. And I don't know if it was because I just felt like it felt so, I guess, mechanical for me. It felt like I guess it felt like it was kind of shoehorned in from an execution standpoint. Thematically, though, I can see what you guys are saying. I think it's just the way it kind of leads to what you're talking about, Justin, with the whole thing about an idea and how that idea can affect a person's life even years later, and how that relates to childhood trauma. I felt like thematically we had already gotten that the way this ending kind of resolves itself, all it really did for me was take away the emotional resonance that I had with this specific character, that so-and-so committed this thing that happens in the end, just we'll say that. And it kind of left me feeling a bit annoyed more than anything else. And maybe I'm biased because I don't really like the whole twist ending trope a lot of times. And here, I don't think it was really that well warranted. That's really my biggest criticism here. But I really like the subtlety of the first half, though.
I also like the subtlety of the first half, Brendan. Don't get me wrong. That I do like. Right. For me, though, it plays on ideas that I found pretty compelling, but just to kind of get back to where I felt like the film was getting a little tedious, for me, it wasn't so much what was happening with Bateman's character. I actually kind of like that little spinoff because it plays into his character thematically that I liked. But for me, in the second act, where Gordo is kind of coming back a few times and then he disappears, like you're saying, Justin, for a little bit, I felt like there was a lot of repeated shots and a lot of repeated elements where Edgerton was trying to amp up the tension, and he was getting into the psyche of the Robin character, which I liked. And it's really subtle, like you're saying, Brendan. But for me, where it falls apart, or where it felt a little too tedious for me, is he does it too many times. I think it happens like 4 or 5 different times where we see the Robin character freaking out, and we're not like, I got it after like 2 or 3 times. I didn't need to see it more and more, and that to me is where I was taking out a little bit with it. The execution is fine. I just felt like he went too far with it.
Yeah, and that's where I'll kind of agree. Where I stated how I felt like the second half got a bit more mechanical and kind of veered a little bit more into convention or thriller territory, because that's very much what a conventional thriller may do, is that it repeats those similar tropes and similar notions for the sake of building suspense. I mean, he does it. There's more of a craft here in the way the way Joel Edgerton does it. I will definitely agree with that, but I do think the fact that it is very reoccurring did, kind of like with you, but for me more so, it took me out of the film, unfortunately, and it kind of left a lot of the suspense out of the film. I didn't feel as much suspense anymore because the thing with there are at least 2 big jump scares in this movie. I won't say what happens just for the sake of spoilers, but you can kind of tell where they're coming just by the way that Edgerton's slowly building up to it. But when they happen, and I'll admit, I jumped when they happened. The problem with a jump scare is like it's that feeling of, let's say you're hanging off the edge of a cliff, and if you let go, you're going to fall to your death. That feeling is terrifying. The jump scares here are like someone grabbing you out of nowhere and pulling you to safety. And the second that I felt like I kept getting pulled to safety after those things happened, I kept losing myself within the suspense for the rest of the film, and it happened too many times that I was taken out by that point.
But see, I wasn't, and I think the reason the jump scares work for me is because it only happens a few times. Like you said, it only happens like twice, and each time it plays into Robin's paranoia. And for me, I was okay with that. And I was okay with the way he crafted that tension and that suspense you're talking about. I just felt like it was a little too repetitive in the second act.
And yeah, I'll agree. And that's why I think I felt that way. Maybe the first time I was fine with it, but when it kept going, when it did it again, and then again, and then again, sure. I got to the point where I'm kind of like you. It's like, okay, just let's get more to the subtle drama that was going on here, because that was my favorite moments of the first half.
Well, I want to get into why the ending and why a lot of this film works for me. And I think the big thing that I took away is that while on the surface, yes, this is a mystery thriller and it's serviceable as that, it also works as this metaphor for how our past choices can come back to haunt us, and how we deal with those experiences is a crucial piece to our life. And we can deny them, we can pretend they don't exist, or we can face them straight on. There was a line where Gordo, at this dinner that he has with him, he says, the bad things that happen to us can be a gift, as to say that we can learn from them and become a better person. And like in Cachet, which is a film I referenced earlier, there is a connection between the mystery elements and the husband characters, or in this film, between Gordo and Simon's past. And as things play out, Simon is given a choice of either denying those connections or dealing with it. And simultaneously, we have Robin, who is dealing with her own demons, which surfaces when she becomes a victim of Simon's past demons. And the difference for me, and this is where the film gets really interesting and it starts picking up here, is that Robin is willing to meet them head on and actually process what she's going through, where Simon wants the past to be the past. And he doesn't realize that the consequences that he set in motion have these devastating effects to it. And there's some really wonderful symbolism for me at the end of the movie where it depicts Simon outside, so to speak, and Robin is enjoying this new life because she faced her demons and overcame them. And to me, I found that exploration in the third act absolutely compelling.
I totally agree with that. And I can't say too much because I don't want to, again, we're going through the spoilers, because this is a movie I feel like if you give away too much, it kind of ruins it for somebody else's experience.
Sure. Yeah.
But I mean, it's really satisfying, that ending. And because, I think back to things that, maybe people did to me while I was younger or even older. And you see, like you said, how Jason Bateman's character, he's experiencing things just because he didn't meet those past things that he did head on. And I loved it. I thought that was such an interesting ending, and I just loved the fact that earlier, whenever you guys were talking about the tedious moments and how he kept playing into Robin's paranoia and everything, I love the fact that it never showed him. Like, it never showed Gordo. Like, you never got that shot that you do in all these psychological thrillers where, we see one of the characters that's getting preyed upon is in the house and there's a noise, and then you get that one little quick shot of them kind of walking past something, and then you realize, oh yeah, it was them in the house. I really like that it didn't show that at all. And I thought that it played in nicely with the fact that we're watching Jason Bateman's character, and we got to watch videos. This is such a tough movie to talk about without going into spoilers. But we watched the videos of Robin's character, and we just got to see like how she was reacting to certain things, and then we're getting to see how Jason Bateman's character is reacting to certain things from Gordo's perspective. because he's getting to he got to see all of it play out. Like you said, like the fact that he got to see that Robin was facing her challenges head on. She didn't know it, but he was there at all times to see that kind of stuff. So I don't know. I just really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed that ending as well.
And it does go, I guess, hand in hand something with one of my favorite quotes from the film, something that Gordo says towards the beginning of the film where good people deserve good things, which I think is probably the biggest connection I can make with the film's finale. I guess part of my problem with the film's ending is because everything that we were able to get thematically from this movie, I felt like I already had gotten all of that, and the ending didn't give me anything new. And that was really my biggest problem with it. And at the same time, I'm really trying to, float around this properly without saying too much for the sake of spoilers, because my wings are really clipped in how I want to talk about this.
Sure.
But the biggest thing it really did for me, unfortunately, was that I had a lot of pity for a certain character, and then all that pity was just gone. I felt more anger than anything else, and I don't think I was supposed to. And I think that's where my biggest problem was, that it just took so much of the emotional resonance that I had in this film. It took a lot of it away from me, and I think the quote unquote twist of the film's final couple minutes didn't add anything really thematically for me that I didn't already have from this film, that I already really still liked about it, and that was really my biggest frustration.
I was going to say really quickly that I think that your pity that you had for that character, you felt like you had to take it away for him, but I think that that's just based on a choice you had to make of whether or not he did or didn't do this act in the film.
Sure.
So if you feel like he did do the act in the film, then sure, you take that pity away from him, and now you feel that anger towards this character because this character is just repeating actions that were basically done to him. So,
but again,
if you don't like think that he did that, then I feel like just like the Robin character, he met his challenges, albeit in a very kind of sadistic way, but he faced them and put them out there in the open.
And I guess
in a very sadistic way.
No, yeah, it's very sadistic, and I guess that's a good point and a good argument you make. Still, that ambiguity, and maybe I gotta see the movie again to try and understand what that ambiguity that you're talking about really is meant to mean. Because at this point, for me, even that ambiguity there didn't really have much of a purpose for me.
See, I really like that ambiguity as well, and I'll go more into why in final thoughts. But one thing I want to touch on, Brennan, is when you were talking about how you didn't get much thematically, even though they gave us a lot of that through the first half of the film. For me, what I like about the third act especially is how we see in action Robin is having to face her demons. And not only that, but she's got to face her husband's demons from choices that he made. And so while she is acting on it, we see where the Simon character is a lot more willing to just kind of soak in his past. And there is a conflict there. And the way that they explore that conflict is amazing to me, especially with this notion of how Simon believes that time is a factor in healing, and I'll just leave it there for the sake of spoilers. But I feel like the film questions those ideas and those notions, and it's clearly something that didn't work for the Gordo character. We see that with the Robin character as well. And Justin, you were talking about how there's some stuff that happened in Chicago, and while we don't get all the details, there's enough of it that is implied that I was able to keep up with the film and I knew exactly what was going on. But when you're talking about time and how it can either prolong our pain or whether it can heal it, I think the way the film deals with that to me is interesting, especially when you're talking about undealt pain. And for me, that notion was intimately connected with those notions of facing our past that I was talking about previously. And those two ideas I thought were expelled pretty thoroughly. They resonated for me big time. And that's why those final shots of the film, where we see the juxtaposing shot of Simon in one place, on the outside, so to speak, like I was saying, and Robin, who is on the inside, for me, that was absolutely fascinating. I completely bought it. I thought it was executed fantastically well.
Yeah, and I just want to bounce off quickly because I totally see your point, and that's an absolute fair point. Actually, I will agree 110% thematically about what you're talking about. I completely agree that that's what the film's about, and I respect that that's what this film is about. And I absolutely that's why I still like this movie overall, and why I'm still going to be recommending it. I mean, I'm just kind of jumping right to that now. I think my biggest problem is the quote-unquote sadistic surprise of it, because and those final shots you're talking about, I also agree with. Those are brilliant. I love that juxtaposition. Sure. It reminded me a lot of the ending of another film that I've been talking to you a lot about, JD, but just for the sake of spoilers, I won't even mention what the film is, but it reminded me a lot of that, and I appreciate it about that. But
sure.
this whole, it's really the surprise element of the film's final act. That's because everything thematically, what you're talking about, I felt like I had already still had even before the final act had even taken place. So I still question where a lot of that came from, but I see your point, and that is fair.
All right, well, let's get to final thoughts and grades. Let's toss it to you first, Justin. Any final thoughts, and what grade would you give The Gift?
Well, I think The Gift for me was a pleasant surprise. To be totally honest, until you guys asked me to come on this podcast and talk about it with you, I was not going to go see this movie. And I didn't even see a trailer for this film, from what I can remember. I have a habit now. I don't go into the movies until the movie's starting. So I'm literally usually 20 minutes late because I'm like, I don't want to see these trailers. They show too much these days.
I feel you.
I got to start doing that too.
I feel you, man.
It has been glorious, let me tell you, because I go into a movie and it's just a brand new, fresh experience for me. I don't have any expectations going into the film. I went and saw American Ultra on Friday, and I messed myself up because I watched a bunch of trailers for that, so I had really high expectations going into that. And that's what happens sometimes. The movie doesn't meet them.
Sure.
But yeah, this movie, like I said, it's a pleasant surprise. I really, really enjoyed it. It's like you guys said before, it's a very subtle psychological thriller. It's not the not the in-your-face ones that we're probably going to talk about a little bit later in our top 3 movie stalkers. Fantastic performances, like you said, from Jason Bateman, Joel Edgerton, Rebecca Hall as well. And I mean, bravo to Joel Edgerton for this being his first directorial debut, as well as, is this the first time he's written anything, or I'm not familiar?
He's at least co-written 1 or 2 scripts beforehand. I think he wrote The Rover, didn't he, JD?
I'm not sure off the top of my head, but he might have.
I'll have to double check that.
Yeah, go see it. I think it's a really nice movie. It's only an hour and 40 minutes or something like that, so I would recommend it.
Okay.
And a grade, I would give it a B.
Okay, what about you, Brendan?
So I just double-checked, and the Rover is based on a story by him. So he does get a writing credit, but he didn't write the actual screenplay. But still, that's almost half the battle when you think about it.
Sure.
Now, I guess for final thoughts from me, I mean, I already kind of beat the dead horse on that. I'm not in agreement with you guys as far as the film's climax. So I want to spend the rest of the time just talking about the things I did like. Because like I said, I am recommending this movie. I think it is an overall good experience and a good movie. And I know a lot of other people that I'd easily recommend it to because I know they'd like it even more than I did. But the performances in this movie, I mean, I think at least Jason Bateman and even Joel Edgerton are very close to quote-unquote Oscar-worthy, I would say. They are fantastic in this movie, especially Jason Bateman. For someone like him who is known for, like the Arrested Developments, the Junos, the Horrible Bosses, movies like that. The fact that he disappeared within the first couple minutes of this film says an absolute lot. And like you were saying, Justin, how much you hate this guy, and I completely agree. I never thought I'd be able to hate someone as adorably funny as Jason Bateman. It's ridiculous.
Sure.
So, and that I absolutely commend the film for that. And like we were already talking about the film thematically, JD, because I completely agree with everything you were talking about the connection between past traumas and how those simple ideas can continue to affect an individual even almost 20 years afterward. And that, I want to leave it at that because there's a lot of notions that this film has that are very relatable to almost any of us, growing up. And I just want to leave it at that because that's essentially what this film is, and I absolutely respect the hell out of it for it. And I do think Joel Edgerton, as a director, does have some visionary notes that I would like to see him continuing his work as a director. I'd like to see him kind of branch off and do something, like, from a genre standpoint, something completely different, because I think he brings a unique eye to this very conventional genre, even though I do think the film does lean on conventionality a little too much in the second half, as I mentioned. I still think overall the movie's worth seeing because of the notions of what it has to say thematically and for the performances, and especially for the subtle intensity of the first half. So I'm probably with you, Justin. I'd probably give this film a B still. I was leaning more towards a B-, but I think a B is more fair because of how much I liked what happened in the first half and how much this film does have a resonance thematically, even though I wish it did lead to a climax that I feel like personally would have added more for me.
Well, I think as far as final thoughts for me, the one thing I got to touch on, since you guys already talked about it, is the film's climax. And, I think the film does a pretty good job of flipping the coin between antagonists and protagonists in this movie, especially when dealing with those main themes as I was talking about. And at certain points, you start to doubt all three of these main characters before you inevitably find out the truth about them. And in the end, when you're talking about the Gordo character, he is a bit ambiguous. And I like that because while we do know his motives, they are clear, you can kind of sympathize with him in a lot of ways. But when you're talking about his actions, which get a little crazy, they're a little bit over the edge for sure, I think you can question whether they're warranted or not, but are they moral? And even if we sympathize with him, does that justify his actions? Maybe they are and maybe they're not, but I think that gray area that they showcase him in, I really like that. Because I think on the surface, it intertwined with the Robin and the Simon characters, and then thematically added some layers that I liked as well. So I like that it leaves it up to the audience to answer some of those unanswered questions. As far as other final thoughts, I do want to touch on the performances as well. I think they're absolutely fantastic. I love seeing Rebecca Hall. I haven't really seen a ton of her work, I feel like, over the last 5 years. I know she was in Transcendence, and she was in Iron Man 3 for a little bit, but outside of those, I'm not sure if I've seen a lot of her work lately, so it was great to see her. I thought she was really fantastic. Jason Bateman disappears, like you guys were saying, and I love Joel Edgerton. I felt like he channeled some Tom Hardy grittiness that I don't know if I've seen from him before. So
I could see Tom Hardy in a role like that. Yeah, it's a good comparison.
Absolutely. So I love that. I thought that was really fantastic. And just to touch on Edgerton's direction here a little bit, I feel like you can see his influences a little bit, especially to some of those past psychological thrillers, but he adds his own flavor to it that I like. And I like how he uses some modern horror tactics to add to the film. It didn't really distract me a whole lot. And of course, I'll just disagree with Brendan about how he handles the climax. I thought was great, not only from a direction standpoint, but from a script standpoint especially. I was really moved by. I thought it was great. I thought the pacing was really well handled too. So for me, this is probably one of my biggest surprises of the year. I would give this an A-. I really, really dug this film quite a bit. So, and last thing I just got to touch on real fast is Danny Bency's score, which I thought was very moody and atmospheric. I think it's what makes the film feel subtle yet intense at the same time. So I really like the vibe that the score brought to this film. So on that note, if you want to read more of my thoughts, check out our Letterboxd page at letterboxd.com/InSessionFilm.
And if you agree or disagree with our takes on The Gift, you can let us know by leaving a comment on our Facebook page at facebook.com/InSessionFilm, or you can tweet us at InSessionFilm, and you can also leave us a comment on our Google Plus page or email us at InSessionFilm@gmail.com.
All right, the InSession Film Top 3 is next, and we're going to be discussing our top 3 movie stalkers.
Well, what am I supposed to do? You won't answer my calls. You change your number. I mean, I am not going to be ignored, JD.
Stay tuned. We'll be right back. The InSession Film Top 3 is brought to you by the First Time Watchers podcast. And of course, Brendan, we just got done talking about The Gift, and I gotta say, just like that movie, the First Time Watchers podcast will haunt you, but in all the best ways possible.
They are certainly a gift in and of themselves.
Yes,
a
they
gift
are.
To the world, and definitely a podcast that not only that you have to check out, but one I think maybe we're stalking a little too much because we just love them so much.
We can't help ourselves.
we can't, but we can't blame them because they're not only a great supporter of our show, but as I mentioned, they're definitely a podcast you guys need to check out, hosted by Tim, Walter, and Hermano, and their knowledge of their movies is certainly a gift.
Absolutely. Their banter is amazing. It's very entertaining, and you can just tell they have a lot of fun with their show. Much like, not really The Gift in a lot of ways, but some other films that are like that.
I was waiting to see how you can throw that in there, but I'm glad you went that route.
Yeah, I was trying to think. I was like, well, The Gift, not really, but I guess maybe if you think about it in terms of gifts are fun, and the First Time Watchers podcast is fun.
Presents.
Yeah, exactly. So,
wrap it up and put a nice bow on it. That's what their show is.
Exactly, yeah.
But what is unique about them is that every week they'll pick a movie that they've never seen before and watch it and discuss it on their show to create this real fresh perspective on their take on that film. They'll also discuss other films and other trailers that they've seen recently. It's really entertaining.
Absolutely, and they give some great movie recommendations at the end of the show that I would also pay attention to. And overall, the show is just smart, it's fluid. These guys just have a lot of fun together. You got to love their chemistry. That being said, Brendan, where can you find this gift on the internet?
Well, Simon Says, check them out at firsttimewatchers.blogspot.com. Simon Says, hit them up on Twitter at firsttimewatchers. And Simon Says, search for them on Facebook by just searching for First Time Watchers.
Yes, and you can also go subscribe to them on iTunes and leave them a review while you're there. I promise it's worth your time. And in fact, on their last episode, Talking Coherence, yours truly was on the show with them, and it was a gift to my life, so I'm glad I got a chance to do that. So go and check it out. Hey, man.
That's great, though.
It's a gift having these guys in my life. I love them. You should go check them out. Again, that's First Time Watchers.
MovieMavericks.com, broadcasting current box office breakdowns, movie news, and reviews. Now for your hosts, Jason and Trevor.
Hey now, even though we're over 200 episodes deep into the Movie Mavericks podcast, it's still not too late to start listening.
Where every show we give you 10 truths, 20 lies, and a bunch of Hollywood secrets.
It's like existentialism slipping into nihilism.
MovieMavericks.com.
This podcast is a proud member of the Lamb Podcasting Network. Find the network at largeassmovieblogs.com.
You're listening to the InSession Film Podcast. This is episode 131, and it's top 3 time. And now for our top 3 coming off of a film like The Gift, we're going to be going over our top 3 favorite movie stalkers, which I think this is going to get pretty disturbing quickly, but I look forward to it. But anyway, before we get going, did you guys have any criteria or rules that you used to pick your list? We'll toss to you first, Justin.
I don't think I had any specific criteria other than I think a lot of these people scared the crap out of me when I was a kid, and so that's why I chose them. As when I was a young boy, I was made to watch some of these movies probably before I should have watched them, and they haunted me, their performances. So that was my only criteria, and they're really creepy. I think that's the name of the title. So yeah, I think that was mine right there. Or stalkers, not creepy, but usually stalkers are creepy.
Yeah, that I would agree with that. I think we'll all agree with that. I'll have more thoughts on that later. But how about you, JD? Any criteria?
Really, the only criteria that I looked at is I kind of wanted to differentiate stalkers and obsession. Because they can kind of be the same thing. And last year when we talked about Nightcrawler, we did our top 3 characters that had obsessions. And so I wanted to kind of veer away from that, or some of them can kind of blur into a little bit. So I wanted to look at characters that definitely had stalker qualities to it. And that could be some broad strokes there, but I wanted it to kind of fit in that vein a little bit.
Okay, that's kind of interesting because I guess I'm a little bit on the opposite end of your spectrum, JD, because I wanted to focus on characters that did maintain a certain level, I guess, of quote-unquote obsession. But again, I wanted it to be, I guess what you're saying, somehow differential based on what we did for a previous top three, so it wasn't too repetitive on that regard.
Sure.
But I guess
don't get me wrong, like, of course, when you're talking stalkers, there is going to be an obsession, but I wanted the characters to have stalker qualities and not it just being about the obsession, if that makes sense.
No, I completely agree, and I wanted to focus more on the physical stalker qualities. But at the same time, the reason why I wanted to maintain that level of obsession was because I wanted to veer away from what you may see. I don't want to confuse stalker with slasher, so I didn't want to include all these slasher films that I think, because people may argue movies like Scream and even Halloween that these are definitely stalker characters, but I didn't want to go that route. I wanted to stick with the obsession angle, something that's definitely within the similar vein that we got from The Gift. So I wanted to maintain that, and at the same time, what you were just saying, Justin, the creep factor has to be amplified. It absolutely has to be. Whether if it's like, really like physically creepy or even just kind of comically creepy. I may have more to say about that later, but I wanted to maintain that level of creep, I guess you could say.
Fair enough.
But without further ado, Justin, we'll start with you. What is your number 3?
Well, I already mentioned it earlier in the podcast. It was a movie that I made my girlfriend watch this morning, and that was Fear, and Mark Wahlberg's character in Fear, David McCall. Yeah. I remember watching this when I was a kid, and I was really scared of Mark Wahlberg. I can't even pronounce his name after that. I don't know what I was thinking, because I just watched it this morning, and man, was this movie horrible. Good Lord, was it bad. I mean, I think I had fonder memories of it, that it was like really, really tense, and, I was scared out of my mind while I was watching it, and there were some moments in this film that I was genuinely terrified. There's the scene where Mark Wahlberg is trying to break into the house, to Reese Witherspoon's house, and I'm not gonna repeat what he says, because I think this is not an explicit podcast. But he's looking through the peephole, and the dad's looking back through it, and he's like, "So let me in the effing house." And throughout the rest of the movie, I was asking my girlfriend this, because I was like, how do people tell like that these people have star-like qualities? Because you watch these movies of when they're younger in their careers, and you're like, how did they go on to become this person that's been in Hollywood for 20, 30, some people 40 plus years? Mainly, I was looking at Reese Witherspoon, like the acting that she portrayed in this film. But even Mark Wahlberg, like, I didn't see much from him at the beginning of the film, but that moment when he let that line out and he just looks horrifyingly scary, I was like, that dude's a star right there. Regardless of what how you feel about his films these days, because I'm not as high on his films lately, but his overall film career is pretty darn good. You can put it up against a lot of other people, and you're like, this is a very good actor. But yeah, he was super scary, and anybody that gets a tattoo on their chest that they put on their chest and it says the number 4 in Eva, no, not ever, Nicole Forever, is pretty creepy to me, and quite the stalker.
Sure. It's been a long time since I've seen this movie. I think, actually, I don't even know if I have seen it now that I think about it, but maybe I'm confusing it with something else, but I think I had, because of Mark Wahlberg, and I remember him in a role like this. I think it came out in the early 90s. Is that right, Justin?
I think it was 96, because I caught up with it maybe about 4 or 5 years later when I first was in high school. And I don't remember loving the film. It's been a long time since I've seen it, but I do remember some of those stoic qualities you're talking about with Wahlberg, and him having that kind of awful vibe about him. I don't remember the tattoo, but that's hilarious.
The tattoo was bad. I mean, he etched it in his chest with, I don't know what it was, some kind of knife. So, and I wanted to point out, I didn't even realize this, but James Foley was the one that directed this movie. And I mean, he's done quite a few movies similar to this as well. Perfect Stranger with Bruce Willis, like the obsession creeper stalker movies.
Oh yeah,
and
I remember that.
I think he's directing 50 Shades of Darker in 2017, and like the remake of Jacob's Ladder, if that's still happening. But I'm actually kind of curious now to see his. I mean, I didn't even watch 50 Shades of Grey. I don't think I ever will watch it, but 50 Shades of Darker with him directing it, he's definitely got that knack for bringing out these creepy performances in his actors. So who knows? Maybe I'll go see 50 Shades of Darker. I won't know what's going on, but if he's directing it, maybe I'll check it out.
Interesting point. And I think he's also been the man behind directing some of the most recent House of Cards episodes, too. And there's definitely some connection there as far as the creep factor you're talking about.
Yeah.
But yeah, I should probably catch up on this movie, Fear, because I think I've seen it. I just don't quite remember it, but it sounds intriguing.
I don't know if you should check it out. Maybe the last 30 minutes of it.
Well, then I'll just do that. Thanks for the advice.
Yeah.
But continuing on, JD, what is your number 3?
Well, continuing in with the tradition of talking about films that aren't super great, but characters good enough for this list, I'm going with Hetty Carlson from Single White Female for my number 3. This is, of course, played by Jennifer Jason Leigh, who I think is wonderful in this film. The movie overall, I don't like. In fact, I probably would be on the verge of not recommending it, but I think this character is really wonderful. So if I did recommend it, it would be for this alone. The character of Hetty Carlson, she kind of suffers from survivor's guilt because she had a twin sister who died when she was 9 years old. And she has this line that really stands out to me in the first act of this film where she says, "I always felt like a piece of me was missing." And it builds some sympathy with her. And I feel like they did a pretty good job in the first act of making you feel for that character. And it's kind of funny when relating it back to our gift review about how time doesn't necessarily heal anything. I think that certainly plays here with this character as well. And so to compensate, she stalks her roommate, and she uses her roommate to kind of fill a void in her life. But when her roommate, Allie, finds out what's happening, things unravel pretty quickly, and it kind of turns into a little bit of what you're talking about, Brennan, in terms of it becoming conventional. You could argue, I guess, kind of slasher horror kind of thing, but I think it works well because of the character, how you're able to relate with her, and the vulnerabilities that she has. And while she does kind of villainize herself a little bit, there is empathy that you have for her, and you can understand her emotional struggles and even some of her, I guess, intellectual struggles that she has in this movie as well. And so while the climax of the movie does certainly get a bit tropey, and as a film, like I was saying, it's not super great, but the character I found super compelling, and I would argue is really good in a bad movie.
Interesting. I have not seen this one, I know for a fact, so I have nothing to say.
Well, it's early 90s,
yeah,
and I think with these movies, that seemed to be the decade of these types of films, because you can go back in like the late 80s and early 90s to mid 90s, and this was the biggest types of films that were coming out.
That's a good point.
It seemed like every year, like these, I don't know if they were just back to back in the theaters, and much like the way that we get superhero type films or really big action blockbusters, it seems like these were the movies that everybody was going to see back then. Yeah. I would like to find out the reasons why that was. Like, what was so wrong with that? I guess that's not necessarily. I guess it would be my parents' generation, because I was a kid then.
Sure.
Yeah, they must have had some issues back then, because they loved the crap out of those types of movies. Silence of the Lambs is another, all that types of those themes were very heavy.
Well,
then.
I was just listening to another podcast that was talking about Charles Manson and the crazy fiasco that was, but how popular that was as well. Like, the media coverage on that was insane, and it was just what people was into. So, 20 years past that, that's just kind of what people were into in the 80s and early 90s. So,
That's true.
But, I think the character does work here. Even though it's a bad movie, it becomes formulaic. The writing isn't great as from a plot standpoint, but I think this character has a lot of complicated layers to it. You do want to help her, but you also want to kill her at the same time. So I think those layers at least works for the character. And since we're talking character specifically, it's good enough to make my top 3.
Yeah, and kind of going off of that for my number 3, because my number 3 is really more based on the character more so than the movie. Even though I would argue that it's still a good movie, But I think the character here is what adds this element to this film. But for my number 3, I'm going with the film from 1971, which was also Clint Eastwood's directorial debut. The character of Evelyn Draper from Play Misty for me, played by Jessica Walter, who's actually best known for the TV series Arrested Development, coincidentally, which also had Jason Bateman in it. But I think what really adds a lot to this film, because essentially, I don't know if you guys have seen it. In fact, most people I don't even think have seen it anymore in this day and age. But what ends up happening, the character of Dave, played by Clint Eastwood, he's a radio station host in California. And Evelyn Draper keeps calling him, always requesting the song Misty by Errol Garner. And I guess what happens one meeting that they meet up at a bar, and then I guess that she's trying to insist on a no-strings-attached sexual relationship with her, and then she finds that he's trying to connect with an old flame, and she absolutely just loses it. But I think the creep factor here for me is just the notion and the idea of stalking someone via technology, being a constant phone call, and how irritating that could be. But I think that's where it adds a lot to it. Now, the movie itself, it's Clint Eastwood's first film as a director. He was definitely kind of finding his stride. I think there are still some flaws within the movie, but it does have some genuine tension that I respect out of it. But a lot of that really does come from Jessica Walter's performance, and I think she is genuinely creepy in this film and has some pretty interesting motives kind of defining her that's very questionable. Definitely something you don't really agree with, but it's definitely creepy to watch, and I have to give her some points for that. So that's why that's my number 3.
I'll have to check that one out. I've never seen that before, but that one kind of hits close to home because my mom has been in radio for a number of years, and that has happened to her numerous times with people, just calling in and doing really creepy things. And I don't know if either of you are familiar with radio, but they do remotes, and they'll do live, basically live remotes at the mall or wherever at a rodeo. And people, and I say people, these creepy stalkerish people would come out to these things, and I mean, they're just, it's so weird and it's dangerous because she's had, I think, at least one run-in where she had to involve the police, basically, because some guy was just literally, stalking the crap out of her on, he was calling the radio all the time, showing up to these remotes, like sending weird packages to the radio station and whatnot. Yeah, it's really creepy, and it is funny how you bring up technology because we live in it on a daily basis. People can get out to us, via review. We give out our Twitter addresses. We give out our emails for people to contact us. And you're opening the door up for people to send you some really awkward and sometimes mean things. So, yeah, I need to check that one out. I've never seen it before, but I know that I think Spencer from Film Dispenser had mentioned that one as well. Okay. And that's a blind spot for me. I've never seen that, and I love Clint Eastwood. So.
I wouldn't be surprised if your mother worked in radio. She probably wanted to avoid this film for those exact reasons. Because what you're talking about, those tropes you're talking about, the film does kind of play on those. So I wouldn't be surprised if she wanted to stay the hell away from this thing.
And I did work in radio for quite a while, actually. I graduated in broadcasting, so this is certainly something that speaks to me as well. And while I didn't necessarily think of this one, we had some good responses on Twitter for this one. But I haven't seen the movie, but one that's kind of similar that I have seen that didn't quite make my list, but was an honorable mention, was Patton Oswalt and Big Fan, who similarly kind of calls into this one radio show and stalks that, and eventually stalks another guy because of a beef he gets into, but through the same kind of ideas. And I've seen this sort of kind of play out in real life in terms of when I worked at ESPN Radio here in Lexington, Kentucky, there would be radio shows I'd work for, and every single day we'd get the same exact callers. And I don't know if any of them actually stalked our hosts or not, but it wouldn't surprise me if it did. So,
dang,
it happens.
It's crazy.
Big Fan. I didn't even think about that film. I got to put that in my honorable mentions now, so thanks for that.
You're welcome.
But anyway, continuing on for the sake of time, Justin, what is your number 2?
My number 2 is going to be a combination of films, and I'm cheating, but I think they're all the exact same film with just different actors and actresses in them. Okay. But I call this little list the girls/women that I was in love with as a kid, but then scared the hell out of me after watching these films, and they are The Crush with Drew Barrymore.
Okay.
No, excuse me. That was not Drew Barrymore. The Crush was with Alicia Silverstone.
Yeah, sure.
Poison Ivy was with Drew Barrymore. And then Swim Fan.
Oh, yeah.
With Erica Christensen. So, yes. You never thought somebody would bring up Swim Fan, I'm sure, on your podcast.
I was hoping no one would ever would. But at least this is the right show to do it. So I'll give you the benefit of the doubt.
Exactly. They're all very, very terrible movies, and they, like I said, they all have very similar themes of, a female that kind of lusts after a guy. With Poison Ivy and Crush, they're both older men, and they do anything and everything to get into their lives. They try to destroy their relationships that they have with their wives, their children, basically just trying to destroy these guys, their complete lives. And especially when it comes to Alicia Silverstone and Drew Barrymore, because Drew Barrymore does not have a wholesome image if you know about her as far as like her real life. But as far as from films, it's pretty much a wholesome image from what I can remember for her entire filmography. That one, not so much, and especially Alicia Silverstone. But yeah, these two, I would not recommend any of these movies watching them, but I thought they all three nailed the creepy stalker factor. They're, like you said earlier, both of you guys, they have extreme obsessions, and they are creepy, creepy, creepy.
And from the early 90s again, so I think you're onto something.
Again, I'm telling you, the 90s, I could go on a list of every movie that because I grew up watching these all the time because my stepmom loved these type of movies. So I probably watched every one of them. I probably watched all of the horrible Lifetime ones that nobody would recall their names because they were terrible and they were made just specifically for Lifetime, but I've seen them all.
I'm sorry.
I think that's maybe that was why I was like, oh, do I want to watch The Gift or not? But I'm glad I did watch that.
I've seen Poison Ivy, and yes, I'll agree. This movie sucks. But
it was terrible.
Swim Fan's not great either.
I forgot about that. Yeah, I think I've seen that one because my sister was a big fan of it when it came out, and I think she made me watch it. I got like maybe halfway through it. I was like, I'm done.
Yeah.
How about you, JD? What's your number 2?
Before we get into that real fast, since we're on this kick of connections on this show, so Single White Female also came out the exact same weekend as Unforgiven, of course, directed by Clint Eastwood, who was Brendan's number 3. So just a connection there.
Thanks for that, Mr. Movie Knowledge.
You're very welcome.
I'm glad you boosted your credibility just for a few seconds.
Yeah, just had to throw that out there. For my number 2, I'm going with one that maybe a lot of people probably thought of for this one, but I don't care. It's going to make my list, and that is Robin Williams in 1 Hour Photo as the character of Cy. I think this is just a brilliant performance. He's a bit unnerving, but he's also endearing, and he's a very lonely and isolated character, and he works at this one photo department at like a Walmart type place, and he falls in love with this family, something he doesn't have, but you get a sense that he desperately wants inside. And you definitely see this when you see this huge photo collage that he has in his house of this one family that he has just fallen in love with. And I think the film wonderfully juxtaposes the sympathy you have for the character, but there's also this creepy, stalkerish nature to him at the same time. And I thought that dance was really well balanced. And while you can argue that he is a little bit of a creepy guy, I feel like you can also argue that his motives are a bit pure too. I won't go into it for the sake of spoilers, but with the way the end plays out, it's not quite exactly what you would expect. And even how he confronts, I'll just say, one of the family members in this family that he likes is also pure at heart, I think. And so I think it makes for a really wonderful film, one that you can sympathize with, and one that I think is executed really well. And Robin Williams, of course, like I said, is just incredible here. So I like this film. Unlike Single White Female, I would actually recommend it. I think this is a good film, a good performance, and a character that easily makes this list for me.
You know, this would have been my number 4 if we were branching off more. And I think part of the only reason why it didn't quite make my list was because it's been a while since I've seen it, and I didn't feel as fresh on it as I would have liked to include it.
Sure.
But I completely agree with you. And just to go further, While I do think the film itself may have a few pacing problems, maybe like within the middle ground, I think, but that's just something I remember offhand. The fact that Robin Williams was not nominated for an Oscar for this film kind of baffles me. Yeah. It's a complete transformation, not even physically, but instantly. I mean, just
He's
within
incredible.
the first 5 seconds, it's not Robin Williams on screen.
Yeah,
and you know, rest in peace, Robin Williams. We can beat the dead horse on that, and it's a shame. But this performance is definitely one of his underrated gems.
Yeah, and I think that's what's so great about Robin Williams and what I will definitely miss about him, because not just in this movie, but several other movies, like the way he delivers his dialogue, the way that he carries himself, you do feel for him and you feel for his isolation. And like I said, you get this sense of when he falls in love with his family, it's just something he wants. And the way he goes about it is obviously a bit creepy. And that's what makes the character so interesting and so complicated. But
the fact that he can scare you and you feel bad for him all at the same time. Exactly. That's hard to do. Yeah. Very hard to do.
Yeah, and he delivers it fantastically well. So
completely agree. But like I said, probably would have been my number 4 if we were really branching this off. So that is a very close honorable mention for me. Fantastic film. For my number 2, My number 2 may be breaking a little rules here, because some people maybe even argue that this isn't really a stalker in this film, because it's really, kind of think of the notion, what would happen if the quote-unquote obsessed fan who is stalking someone actually succeeded in getting this person, I guess you can say. And the whole movie deals with that whole notion, so which kind of maybe spoils a little bit that my number 2 is Annie Wilkes from the movie Misery, played by Kathy Bates.
Yeah, sure.
Which is definitely more, I guess, of an obsession kind of role, I guess you can say. It's not so much a stalker, but she definitely has the stalking mentality to what she does to this man, played by Jason Kahn, this author who writes these series of misery novels, is what they're called, because they revolve around a character named Misery. And they're I don't know the type of, they're definitely books I would never read. It's stuff that my grandma would probably read. But this nurse of Annie Wilkes is so obsessed with these books that she forces, after he gets into a car accident, and she forces him to stay in his house to recover, forcing him to write a book just for her about the character of Misery and the stuff she puts him through. My God, it's frightening. It's so frightening. And in my opinion, it's one of Rob Reiner's best films as a director. In fact, he tackled 2 Stephen King adaptations, this one and Stand By Me, and I think they're 2 of the best Stephen King adaptations in the world of film out there. He definitely knew how to understand this author, and I think he captures the spirit of that novel beautifully well. And the stuff she does is so over the top, but her performance sells it and adds such an authenticity to even ridiculous scenes like the hobbling sequence where she takes the mallet to his feet. I mean, oh my God! But I believe every second of it. So I think she gives one of the best female performances of the '90s, and I have to include it for that reason. So that's why Kathy Bates' Annie Wilkes is my number 2.
So what year did that come out again, Brendan? Oh, 1990? Early 90s?
So Justin, what the hell, man?
Well, I don't know what's going on there. I have another movie on my list that I guess I could mention it. It made my list. I'm not going to have it as my number 1, but it came out in 1992, and that was The Hand That Rocks the Cradle. And I don't know if either one of you have seen that. It stars Rebecca De Mornay, and she is just stalker, obsession, creeper to the extreme. I'm guessing that neither one of you have seen this before.
I have actually seen it a long time ago, because I think my mom's a big fan of it. And honestly, even when I remember, I thought the movie was not as creepy as I would have liked, so it didn't quite make even an honorable mention for me. But I can see why it would for some.
Yeah, that one is another 92 movie. I don't know what's going on with all those 90 movies. It's just really, really odd. But my number 1 choice, which if somebody's listening right now and they're like, why is this guy picking this as his number 1 choice? I didn't put them in any kind of type of order of this is my favorite or anything like that. But after your Misery one, I felt like we needed to go a little bit light, because that movie is just, it's horrifying. I mean, the stuff, like you said, that she puts him through is, it's tough. But my number 1 choice is, I'm going to see if you guys know this character's name, Elliot Richards. If you watch FX a lot, it's going to certainly ring a bell if you're listening right now, because this movie gets played over and over again on FX. I'm going to go ahead and tell you because I don't think anybody will ever guess it, but the movie's Bedazzled.
Bedazzled.
So I'm bringing up two movies that I am guaranteed will never, ever be brought up again on the InSession Film Podcast. But when you
leave
enlist,
it that way.
Yeah, exactly. But when you enlist Satan on your quest to creep/stalk a girl, you got to move up pretty high on my list.
Wow.
And I mean, to me, Brendan Fraser's character in this is the definition of a creeper. I mean, he knew everything about Allison, everything. And he had not even, what did he, like, barely talk to her one night at a party or something like that? And yeah, this dude, when you go back and watch it from like you take out the funny comedic elements of the movie, which it didn't really have a whole lot of because the movie's pretty terrible.
Yeah.
But you just watch it for the creepy factor. It's pretty creepy. So had to make my list, and I wanted to lighten it up for you guys.
Dan, Elliot, you must be one very proud young man this evening. Simply put, that was a staggeringly dramatic display of athletic ability.
Well, you know, you go out there and you give 110%, and you want to play good, and, you know, you hope you play good. I think we played pretty good tonight.
Well, in the lexicon of sports terminology, and I don't mean to sound contrary here, the word good falls tragically short of encompassing the sheer virtuosity of your performance this evening.
Well, you know, there's no I in the word team, and this is a team effort, and I just want to say that I'm really proud to be associated with these fine individuals that I have the pleasure of working with.
It's a remake too, I think. I think the original came out in the 60s, so that helps branch us out of the 90s finally.
Not by much. It was like 2000.
It was 2000.
They were still 2000, yeah. So it was still, I guess, riding off the coattails, just added a bit of fantasy to it. But yeah, I think I saw this when it came out because I really liked Brendan Fraser at the time. Not only because he had my name, but I really liked him from George of the Jungle, so I had a bit of a kick on watching this guy. But yeah, the movie wasn't for me then, and it's not for me now.
I feel like this is turning into the True Bromance podcast, where one of us is doing good films and characters, and then Justin's doing the bad side.
But he has good points, though.
He does.
We're definitely talking about the creepers themselves, and not so much the quality of the film. And his arguments for these creepy characters are very sound. So I got to give you credit, Justin.
Well, I appreciate it. I thought you were going with a different movie on your last choice, but maybe it'll come up for everybody's first choice here in a second. So
yeah, and kind of going off a little bit about what I think you raised the question, Justin, about, or someone did, about why all these films started surfacing within the early to mid 90s, and I think I know the reason why, but I don't want to say it because it may be someone's number one or something like that. So I'll save that for later. But I think I know the answer to that initial question. But just to, I guess, to continue on, so we don't keep talking about Bedazzled. JD, what's your number one?
Well, I'm going in a very different direction than that, although I love Justin's thinking with this list. It's so great. But really, I feel like for my number one, I could just do a group category like Justin was doing for his number two. Hitchcock, anybody? I feel like I could throw in about 5 or 6 Hitchcock films in here.
Yeah.
But I guess for the sake of just picking one, I'm going to go with Scotty Ferguson from Vertigo for my number one.
You believe I love you?
Yes.
And if you lose me, then you'll know I loved you and I wanted to go on loving you.
I won't lose you.
Let me go into the church. Alone.
Why?
And while it does kind of start off as like an investigation where he's hired to follow this guy's wife, it eventually becomes very personal. And I think because of that reason, it still qualifies, especially given how it affects him later on in the movie. And of course, a lot of people know this, so I don't need to go into it a ton, but he falls in love with the woman that he was paid to follow. He has to save her a couple different times. And there's one really great scene where his fear of heights is exploited. And what I think is one of Hitchcock's best scenes in the bell tower, Absolutely wonderful. And I think what's fascinating about what's going on here is the Scotty character is simultaneously stalking two women. One is dead and one is alive. And that's kind of a spoiler, but you've probably seen this movie by now.
If you haven't, what the hell's wrong with you?
Yeah, exactly. But what's also compelling is that he's stalking this fantasy of his. And this is another big reason why it makes my number one, is because he kind of has this vision and this type of woman that he idolizes and that he dreams about. And throughout the film, he tries to mold and manipulate this fantasy, and he pursues it to some pretty dangerous lengths, and it has some deadly consequences because of it. And for me, that is why this character specifically, I think, stands out from Hitchcock and stands out as the number one for this list for me.
I think, and this made my number 2 on our list of top characters with obsessions.
Yeah.
I think back on that show with Nightcrawler. In fact, I think it was your number 2 as well, JD, or maybe it was definitely in your top 3. I don't quite remember. And I think for a lot of reasons, you know, this is definitely an honorable mention for me. And I think part of the reason why I didn't include it, even though arguably this probably would have been my number 1 as well, mainly just because of how much I love this film. This may be my favorite Hitchcock film. But I think the movie focuses more on the idea of obsession over top of the physical stalking nature, I guess you can argue. So I guess part of my criteria, I guess I wanted to focus more on the physical quote-unquote stalk, even though they had those elements of obsession. And there's definitely a lot of that in this film. But I wanted to focus more on films I think had that stalk element, I guess you can say. But your reasons for why you have this at number 1 is... I absolutely agree with, and if I were definitely in your camp, I probably would be including this at my number 1 for those same reasons, because it's remarkable.
Sure, and I think for me, while it may not have as much physicalities as some of the other ones, I think the reason I wanted to include it is because, especially in the first act of the film, or the first half, there is a lot of him following this woman that he doesn't know at first, but eventually kind of falls in love with. And so there is some physical parts to that. But then later on, there's this physical nature of him trying to manipulate this fantasy of this dreamlike woman that he has. And that's all I'll say without spoilers, but there is some physical elements with that. And,
there is.
And so for me, I think both of them working together is why it qualifies enough for me for this list.
And that's a good point. A lot of that is very investigational, as you were saying at first, which maybe kind of hides some of that at first, but then there's more to it than later on than that. But we could talk about this film for like
all
days on end. Oh my God, what a wonderful film.
Yes.
Yeah. But for my number 1, what's very coincidental is I mentioned that we both had this in our top 3 movie characters with obsessions, as I kind of mentioned, because my number 1 is also from that list, and I think it made my number 3 on that list. But I'm going with Robert De Niro's character, Rupert Pupkin, from the movie The King of Comedy by Martin Scorsese.
Nice.
That's her name.
She signed this when she was in New York doing her last publicity tour for the Misfits. That was her last movie, you know.
Yeah.
She wasn't a great actress, but she did have a real gift for comedy. You know, she died tragically alone, like many of the world's most beautiful women. I don't want to see that happening to you.
Who's this?
Burt Reynolds.
Yes.
Mel Brooks. He's what you call on-funny. Others are just regular. Oh, that's Sid Caesar. He's remarkable. I really like him. He's great. Woody Allen. He's a very nice guy. He's a personal friend of mine.
Of course he is.
No, he is.
Now, I don't know if you guys have seen this one. I think you have, at least, JD.
Yeah, it's been a long time, but I've seen it.
Yeah, but this is one of my...
I haven't.
This is one of my top 5 favorite Scorsese films. It's hilarious, and it's also downright creepy. And you've got Jerry Lee Lewis here essentially playing himself, which I kind of like. I mean, it's kind of a version of himself. But you've got Rupert Pupkin, who is a stand-up comedian, very unknown. He's not famous, but he wants to be famous. But the notion that I love about this is the fantasy that he has, kind of similar to what you're talking about, JD, with the fantasy that Scotty Ferguson kind of manufactures and fabricates in a movie like Vertigo.
Yeah, sure.
Rupert Pupkin kind of does something similar, and there are great scenes where he imagines himself talking with celebrities in his mom's basement, and he's just talking with no one. He's just there in front of the mirror. I feel like we've all had notions like that where we just kind of fantasize about situations with ourselves in there. But then the extremes that this guy goes to try and get comedic fame, which involves kidnapping the character of Jerry, finding him at his house, tying him up, and kind of blackmailing him to get on his show. And it goes on such ridiculous ends, but really does a good job playing with the notion of deception of fame. And I really appreciate about that film. I think it's a very underrated Scorsese film, but I mean, you talk about like how much quote-unquote stalking is in this movie. I mean, 99.9% of the movie is Rupert Pupkin physically trying to find this guy. It's absolutely ridiculous, and I think it is a definitive stalker film for that reason. That's why it makes my number one, and I think it's a great performance by Robert De Niro as well.
Absolutely. It's really interesting you bring that up, Brendan. I really like this film as well. I think a pretty funny story that a lot of people may know about this movie that plays into that a little bit is apparently, like, Robert De Niro, like, even when they were not filming, he would stay in character, and there was times where he would use like anti-Semitic remarks, and it would like piss off Jerry Lewis, and because he never worked with method actors before, it like angered him, but it worked well on screen. So like, there's kind of that same vibe happening off camera too, which is really interesting, and it shows on screen though. It's a phenomenal film. It's one I would really like to catch up with.
Yeah, but you absolutely make a great argument, because that annoyance that Jerry has in the film it feels so real. It really does, and I think a lot of that adds on to this true story you're talking about. So way to go, De Niro. Way to go.
I know, right?
Freaking method actors, man. I mean,
I know, right?
But I guess before we go start moving on, did you guys have any honorable mentions that you wanted to mention quickly? We'll start with you, Justin.
Honorable mentions. I'm trying to think. I mean, since you guys already brought up Robert De Niro, I mean, one other 90s movie, Cape Fear, and The Fan. I mean, those are two great ones. And I think we should just go ahead and nominate Robert De Niro Creeper of the Century. Yeah. So, I mean, that's three right there that he's pretty darn creepy in. So, I would recommend those. And a novel, really quickly, that I think everybody should read. I don't know if it plays into the creepy and obsession vibe. Not so much, I mean, even stalkerish, but it's called Survivor, and I'm going to butcher his last name. I always call him Chuck Palahniuk. I have no clue if that's how he pronounces his last name, but it's a fabulous book. I definitely would highly, highly recommend it. It gets into all these crazy obsessions that a lot of these characters have, and is really, really good. So check it out. It's basically just a satire on modern-day society in America. It's fabulous.
I have not read it. I have to add that to
They need to make it into a movie.
I have to add that to my list of like 50 novels that I want to read. Nice. But it sounds interesting, man. How about you, JD? Any honorable mentions?
I only wrote down a couple. I had, of course, Robert De Niro in The Fan. I talked about Patton Oswalt in Big Fan earlier. You can also throw in Glenn Close from Fatal Attraction, and just kind of thinking outside the box a little bit as far as one for this list is Kiefer Sutherland's character in Phone Booth. I didn't quite I didn't consider him too much because there's kind of more of catching him and then trying to turn his life around, I'll say, I guess, in that movie than stalking. But there's a lot of, through their conversation, figuring out how he stalked him to get him into that position to begin with. And I think that movie's a little underrated. I actually quite enjoy it, and I like thematically what's going on a lot in that movie. So it certainly worked very well for me.
That's a very interesting pick, and I can definitely see your points for that, because I tried thinking outside the box as much as possible, but it was definitely kind of difficult sometimes. But you mentioned Glenn Close and Fatal Attraction, and I was going to mention to you, Justin, that's the film I think is the reason why all those films from the 90s exist. Because I think they're trying to ride on the coat. Yeah, I think they're trying to ride on the coattails of Fatal Attraction, which I felt like kind of started that whole quote unquote female lifetime stalker movie of the week kind of thing. And it's and it was a fine movie for what it was. I think it was definitely a bit new for its time, and that's why it was also an honorable mention for me. And honestly, all the honorable mentions that I had were pretty much talked about already, whether it be Cape Fear, 1 Hour Photo, or Big Fan, or anything like that, even Vertigo, like you were talking about, JD. The only one I had that was a bit different that I was kind of trying to fish for was and it's not really that much of a stalker, which is why I didn't include it, but there definitely is a bit of a creep factor to it. And it's the movie The Night of the Hunter, which, with Robert Mitchum playing Harry Powell in that. And that was it was kind of one I had to dig for because there's not much physical stalking going on. It's more of a, I guess, quote unquote, home invasion / robbery kind of thing. But
Sure.
there definitely are some notions there that I think you can say partially qualify. And regardless, it's a fantastic movie and one that I think still holds up to this day. So that's why I at least wanted to mention it quickly.
Absolutely. And on that note, let us know how your picks stack up against ours. You can email us InSessionFilm@gmail.com or leave a comment on Facebook or Twitter or on our site at InSessionFilm.com.
All right, before we move on, let's talk about this week's poll.
It's real bad, okay? I don't like those numbers at all.
Just one poll? Those things aren't scientific.
Yes, they are. All this is science. This is math.
All right, for this week's poll, since The Man from U.N.C.L.E. came out not this past weekend, but the weekend before, and I'll be briefly talking about it in our third segment, we decided to talk about, for this week's poll, what your favorite film based on a TV series is. And there's a lot to pick from, and a lot of crappy ones, too. So I tried to put at least the good ones here in a poll, but I listed The Untouchables, which I never knew was actually based on a TV show, which I thought was kind of interesting. Also had The Naked Gun from the Files of Police Squad, Wayne's World, The Fugitive, Mission Impossible, Jackass the Movie, Serenity, and 21 Jump Street, as well as another write-in option as well. And I also want to note before I read the results, because we did get a lot of responses on Twitter for Star Trek. I wanted this to focus on the first film within a series that it was based on a TV show, and that would be Star Trek The Motion Picture, which came out in '79. Arguably not the best within that franchise, so I didn't think that was quite fair to include.
Sure.
Just wanted to
just
want to defend myself on that one. But as far as the results go, winning at 31.3%, and it was actually kind of a close call, but the winner was The Fugitive, which is a very, very good movie. I love this film. I'm glad to see it win there. And coming in at second place, 25%, was Joss Whedon's Serenity, obviously based on his show Firefly, which does not get it. I mean, everyone loves it now, but did not get enough credit as it that it did at the time. It really, I wanted to see that expanded. But then coming in at third place, 16.5% was 21 Jump Street. Not surprising, but a very funny movie, and definitely some good picks that one here. And I think we got some good write-in options too, right, JD?
Yeah, because we got several for Star Trek, of course, and we got one for Miami Vice as well. I'm a little surprised though that Mission Impossible didn't get more love. I mean, I know we talked about this a few weeks ago. It seems like a lot of people enjoy the series overall, especially the last few films. But I mean,
I think that's why. I think most people were voting it based on the first film, which I think is one of the maybe better ones, but it's not the best one in that franchise.
Sure,
and I think that's maybe what hindered it.
Yeah, and that's a good point. I guess I'm just surprised that it wasn't in the race a little bit more. But
yeah, especially with Rogue Nation coming out to some pretty high reviews and a lot of acclaim from even moviegoers as well. You thought it'd be kind of high on people's minds.
But The Fugitive is awesome. I think it is deserving of winning this poll as well. It's probably what I would have voted for as well.
Yeah, probably me too. Either that or The Naked Gun, which is one of the funniest movies I think I've ever seen.
Sure. Anyway, we did get a lot of votes, so thanks everybody that voted on the poll this week. We really do appreciate it. And stay tuned, because coming up next, we are going to do a segment where we're going to kind of review some films from 2015, including The Man from U.N.C.L.E, that we haven't really given a proper review yet on the show. So stay tuned. We'll talk about those next. We'll be right back. Hey guys, just want to pause for a quick second to say a huge thank you to everybody that is supporting the show. We really can't do it without you, and it really means a lot to us. And if you want to help support us, there's a couple ways that you can help us out. And one of those ways is checking out our bonus content that we do from time to time. And you can check out all of that by going to our website, click on that bonus content tab, and you'll be able to listen all of that there for a small donation of 99 cents. We actually have them up there for free to listen to, but we do encourage and we really appreciate that small donation. Another way that you can help us out is patreon.com. Patreon is a really great resource in the way that you can help us out by donating per show, essentially, but in the process, you're going to get a lot of really cool stuff. And if you go to patreon.com/InSessionFilm, you'll see a couple different levels that we have there. And the higher the level you give, the more gifts we'll send to you. And it's pretty awesome. So definitely go and check that out. Or maybe you just want to donate one time to the show, and you can do that via PayPal at InSessionFilm.com/donate. You'll see the PayPal button there, and you can just sign up for a one-time donation. Or if you want, we even have a monthly subscription there as well.
Absolutely. I think that's a great way to help support us. And on the subject of gifts, if you're afraid to receive something by Joel Edgerton himself, you can get some gifts from us by going to the InSession Film store at InSessionFilm.com/store. Perhaps you want a nice little item with our logo slapped right on it, whether it be a mug, a tie, a t-shirt, even an iPhone case. We promise we won't send you any poisoned fish with our logo on it somehow. But there's a lot of great items on there, and there's also an option to help customize something for you. If you don't see something on there that you like, just let us know. We can get something customized for you as well. It's a great way to support us while getting some fun collateral in the process, and we appreciate everyone that's helped supported us that way already. And also, as many people may already know, we are sponsored by Audible.com. And at Audible, you can get a free audiobook download and a 30-day free trial by going to audibletrial.com/InSessionFilm. And over at Audible, there are over 150,000 titles for you to choose from for any one of your smart devices that's most convenient for you, whether it be your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or your MP3 player. Perhaps you want to read up on the latest Star Wars collateral, as everyone is itching for The Force Awakens with all this new news coming out with D23 just a few days ago, rather.
Yeah.
A lot of great stuff there to read up on. Now, that is absolutely a gift worth getting, I'll tell you that right now. But that's also a great way to be supporting us at the same time in that process.
Absolutely. And even just the small stuff like a subscription on Jabbercast or on iTunes, or like on Facebook and Twitter, it all goes a really long way, and we really do appreciate everyone's support.
Hi, this is Greg.
This is Chuck.
And this is Dan. And we are Talking in Circles. Because the world needs another podcast, we are here as Geekcast Radio's newest edition.
And as the title says, each week we get lost in conversation about a wide range of topics, including movies, comics, games, art, TV, and even occasionally sports.
We play games and discuss pivotal topics like who would win in a fight, the Kool-Aid Man or Tony the Tiger, and examine the hot-button issues of the world of geekdom. We keep things fresh by taking timeless topics in new directions.
We are simply three friends having a fun time talking about life's most fascinating foibles.
Stay connected with us every Tuesday on iTunes or at geekcastradio.com.
You're listening to the InSession Film Podcast, now syndicated on geekcastradio.com.
I'm going to bed. Please turn this off.
And there's nothing but the smell of her perfume.
No fun dancing by yourself. I need a partner.
Oh, come on, take my hand. Baby, won't you walk with me? Oh, yeah.
You're not an East German chop shop anymore.
Still no drink?
Don't you make me put you over my knee.
So you don't want to dance? But you do want to wrestle.
No, I did not say that.
You're listening to the InSession Film Podcast. This is episode 131. And as we mentioned up at the top of the show, we were planning on doing a full review of The Man from U.N.C.L.E, but unfortunately, I didn't get a chance to catch it this last weekend, and neither did Justin. So we're going to do something a little bit different where we're going to give Brennan the space to talk about The Man from U.N.C.L.E, and I'm also going to talk about another film from 2015 that we haven't done a proper review of on the show. So we're going to kind of do a couple of one-off mini reviews, if you will. And let's start off with you first, Brendan. I know you have some pretty interesting thoughts on this, but what did you think about Guy Ritchie's The Man from U.N.C.L.E?
So here's some stipulations. I want my review to be this is going to be a very brief review because I feel like a lot of people out there are going to have to take my review, quote unquote review of this film, with a very, very small grain of salt, and I have a very difficult time reviewing this film unbiasedly. That basically, as you can kind of maybe tell already, that means I am not a fan of Guy Ritchie. Even some of his films that people love, such as Snatch and maybe even Rock and Roll and Sherlock Holmes, I'm not a fan of. I don't like his style. I feel like every one of his movies that I have seen, it reminds me more of a college student trying to make a college film where they just rip off Quentin Tarantino the whole time. And that bugs it really. I don't see any genuine inspiration out of his films, and it always frustrates me, and I never really can get. It's always a distraction that I can never get engaged with any of his films. Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels is one that I would not say I dislike. I enjoy that film overall for what it is. I don't love it, but I do enjoy a lot of aspects of it. But the stuff I don't like about Guy Ritchie is still present in The Man from U.N.C.L.E. So personally, I pretty much hated this film.
Awesome.
And the reason why I say I want this to be taken with a small grain of salt is because just judging it, trying to judge it unbiasedly as a film, it's not terrible. It really isn't terrible. It does have a lot of flaws overall, though. I do think, I'll get to those first. I do think there is a bit of lack of chemistry between these characters, which I think was the biggest thing that hurt it for me. We're jumped too soon into the action here. We don't really get much time to get these three leads really fleshing their time out together. I would have much rather just seen. I would have much rather just see these guys talk in a table for quite a while to help set things up before just kind of thrown into the action with this film. And the other criticism that I actually keep hearing about this film is the way that the film has a really difficult time juxtaposing its 60s style spy espionage tone with a modern take on action filmmaking. And that criticism that I've heard a lot of other people say is valid. I do think the movie has a hard time juggling these two styles, that it makes it feel very jarring and sometimes out of place. There are a lot of, some of the elements like that I did prefer over others, and I think putting those two together made for a bit of a jarring experience. Those are my biggest unbiased criticisms of this film, but just the Guy Ritchie-isms that I don't like are still here. He's very good at not keeping any shot in this film over 3 seconds long. It's all kinetic energy, this entire film. It feels like the entire movie is on fast forward. And like I say, I keep on thinking he's just kind of sucking Quentin Tarantino's the whole time. Because seriously, the musical soundtrack here is very Tarantino-esque. Even the font that's used to dictate the subtitles looks very much like something you'd see in Inglourious Bastards. And hell, the actor that played Joseph Goebbels in Inglourious Bastards is in this movie.
You can't fault Guy Ritchie for that, though.
I think he has final say of who he wants to cast, so I'm going to fault him for it. But you're right. I'm kind of fishing there. But the point I'm making is that with a lot of his films, I just don't see a lot of genuine inspiration out of him. And the kinetic energy he keeps inputting in his films is such a distraction for me. It gives me a headache. And this film gave me a headache, and I was never invested in it. So while unbiasedly, there are technically some decent things here, but I couldn't get behind him. I'm not a fan of this film.
Well, I'm not exactly sure how to respond to that, because I don't love Guy Ritchie, but I don't hate him either. I actually really like the Sherlock movies, and I like Rock and Rolla as well. I'm not a huge fan of Snatch and some of his earlier ones either, but I don't have a problem with his story. I'm just kind of mixed on him. He's a director that if he has a movie coming out, I'm like, okay, I'll give it a shot, but I'm not jumping out of my seat for it. But I've liked some of the stuff he's done recently, but the trailers for Man from U.N.C.L.E. did nothing for me. I'm not overly thrilled with Armie Hammer. I wasn't impressed by Henry Cavill in Man of Steel. He was okay. He was serviceable in that movie. That's pretty much all that I know him from. And just watching the trailers, it looked very blah. And that chemistry you're talking about that didn't work for you, that's exactly what I felt in the trailers too. I was like, these guys are not selling it for me. Their chemistry looks pretty lackluster. And there's a terrible Russian accent that I see on screen. And that's all that I could see, and it completely took me out. So I'm kind of mixed in terms of, like, I kind of like Guy Ritchie overall, but this trailer looked awful, and the movie looks terrible to me. And so I'm hearing mixed reviews on it. I know that you hate Guy Ritchie, so I don't know, maybe I like it a little bit better than you, but basically what you're telling me, though, is how I felt in the trailer. So your biasness may not necessarily be wrong, at least for me.
And I think there are some other folks who do like Guy Ritchie who have felt the same way. I think part of my problem, and I'm still judging the film unbiasedly, so I'm taking out my negative view of Guy Ritchie itself and his filmmaking tropes. But the film, I think the reason why the lack of chemistry is there is not so much the performances, because I'll actually say this. I thought Henry Cavill and Armie Hammer, just from a performance standpoint, they were fine. Yeah, they weren't that bad. Sure. In fact, Henry Cavill was actually kind of charming in the film. I thought he delivered some pretty interesting one-liners that were pretty funny overall. It's just too bad the writing itself I thought was kind of stiff throughout most of the film, which I felt like didn't make a lot of those comedic moments as earned as they should have been. But I feel that way about almost all of Guy Ritchie's films, so maybe that's a biased point. But the one thing I was going to say was that the film really just jumps right into the action. So the scene in the trailer that you see with, like, Alicia Vikander driving the car and Henry Cavill's hiding in the back seat, and they have this whole chase throughout the streets of, I think it was in Germany where that happened, at least from a setting standpoint. All of that happens maybe within, like, the first not even 5 minutes of the film, and then right after that we're introduced to the notion that these two characters that hate each other have to team up. It's like that's all within the first 10 minutes, and I'm here thinking, wait, I don't feel this. I don't feel this hatred towards them that needs to make for a funny buddy comedy, I guess you can say. I don't feel that. Why are you not taking the time to flesh this out? So just from an unbiased standpoint, I think that's a huge flaw within this film. It doesn't take its time to flesh that out. Would you
consider that more of a scripting issue? Like, we're 2 minutes in and that's the first time they meet and supposedly they hate each other? Or is that kind of a style and the tone is off as well?
I'd say it's a directing thing, because it's kind of going back to what I don't like about Guy Ritchie's kinetic energy, because he makes things go by so quickly. Like I said, I was trying to time it. There's no shot within this film that's less than 3 seconds long. It's so quickly edited together that I think it makes the film feel a lot shorter than it should be.
Interesting.
I guess if that makes any sense. So I think it's more of a directing thing.
Interesting. What about you, Justin? You a Guy Ritchie fan?
I am. I'm definitely a Guy Ritchie fan, but I will say this, that I feel like Guy Ritchie has a problem, and I can't think of a better way of saying this, of not staying in his lane. And I feel like with Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels, Snatch, Revolver, and Rock and Rolla, that was all within his wheelhouse. And they were all films. Now they're cult, like, especially with Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels and Snatch, they're very cult classic-y. They're, you're very hip if you like those types of movies these days, it seems like. But whenever they first came out, they were the little-known gems that somebody saw and they were, like, telling their friends, like, oh my God, you got to see Snatch, or you got to see Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels. And now, since Sherlock Holmes, I don't really understand why he's trying to fit his style into these bigger blockbuster type movies, and I just don't see it working. I am not a fan of Sherlock Holmes, even though I do like, the performances in that movie. I just was not a fan of the two films. I thought they were just kind of bland and didn't really resonate with me after I saw them. But I do really, really like Guy Ritchie. I just wish he would go back to the films that that kind of made him. I feel like that we were just talking about Chappie and Neil Blomkamp. I always forget how to pronounce his last name, but I feel like he kind of got away with that with Elysium.
Sure.
And then he came back into his wheelhouse with Chappie, these smaller South African stories that he can weave so well, because that's a part of his culture.
Sure.
And I think he came back to what made him, to be so admired and so, sought after for, District 9? Yeah. And so I feel like Guy Ritchie kind of needs to go back to that. He needs to get away from these, which he's not, because he's got Knights of the Round Table next, which is going to be, I think, another dud. I hope it's not, but I just don't get the feeling that it's going to be. whenever you guys are talking about Quentin Tarantino, now, what do you mean by his style in the sense of going back to Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels in the hard case? Is it basically because of the way that he did Pulp Fiction and he's like weaving in these different types of stories?
I think it's more so the energy that he brings to it and the way he tries to focus on, I guess, cool and hip dialogue, and something that Tarantino, I think, is very good at. I think the only problem here is that when I watch a Guy Ritchie film, I feel like I see that inspiration too much, and I think it's also at the same time it's not very interesting writing overall. I think it's calling too much attention to itself, and it needs to be more intriguing to warrant that, I guess, is what I'm saying.
Okay. Yeah, no, I can agree with that and everything.
Yeah, I mean, you make some great points, Brendan, and while I don't completely swing to your side of the camp, I'm kind of in the middle with that. I mean, I think his energy and his style certainly works for some of his films, but I do agree with you. Overall, he hasn't quite been able to put on that stamp that other directors have done. So for the sake of moving on, though, the one film that I want to talk about real fast, when I was thinking about this, Brendan, once we made the switch to this, I was thinking about, well, surely there's some small indies out there that I could pimp real fast, like Fault, I think, is a really great film. Appropriate Behavior is one I saw earlier this year that we didn't discuss, which is pretty good, I think. Or even a couple documentaries. We never talked about Kurt Cobain, Montage of Heck, which is in my top 20 of the year so far. I love that movie. And even the documentary Red Army, I think, is amazing and also in my top 20 of the year so far. But, recently when I was watching Jimmy Fallon, he was talking about how he hurt his finger and he had to go to the hospital. And it's pretty well known now, if you follow him at all, that the movie that got him through all of that was this small romantic comedy that came out earlier this year called The Duff. And that's the one I want to talk about. Because, I heard from some people earlier this year, they were like, yeah, that movie was actually pretty decent. You should check it out. But when I saw the trailers, I'm like, skip, pass. I don't really care to watch that movie at all. And I did. I skipped it. I didn't care. But people kept persisting, like, no, you should watch it. It'll surprise you. And then I finally did a few months ago, and I really did enjoy it. I actually did quite like it. It's probably one of my biggest surprises of the year. And I guess part of the reason I liked it is I'm not hugely familiar with the novel it's based off of, and I'm not actually familiar with Mai Whitman either, who stars in this movie with Robbie Amell. And I think part of that is because I don't watch TV as much, and both of them have done a lot more TV work. But in this film, there was a really endearing quality about it, and Whitman and Robbie Amell had some really great chemistry, and the story kind of starts off with them as platonic friends, but Whitman's character of Bianca has kind of always had this crush on Robbie Amell's character of Wesley. And while the trailers to me felt very tropey and very cliche, and to a degree it does get formulaic, but I think they play on it really well, and I think they have a lot of fun with it. And because the chemistry is so great, I just ate it up. I actually I laughed a lot. I thought the story was really well told, and I think we do a good job of giving a little bit of layers to at least the Bianca character that I wasn't expecting. And so for that, I would actually recommend it. I think I gave it like 3.5 stars on Letterboxd. Which would be like, I don't know, like a B, maybe?
Probably like a B plus, I think, yeah.
Somewhere in that range for the show. So I really enjoyed it. So while it does get formulaic, the acting certainly elevates the material here. And I think the director does a pretty good job of making that strike as well. So,
can I ask you real quick before we move on? For the Duff versus Mean Girls, which would you prefer? If you were only given one, you had to take to an island with you, which would you take?
Well, that's hard for me to answer, I feel like, because the cinephiles out there will obviously pick Mean Girls because that was kind of the film of the 2000s when it comes to this genre. But I'm not necessarily the target audience for these kinds of films, and I think that's part of the reason why I wasn't looking forward to the Duff. Is it's just not my thing. It's not a genre that speaks to me, and I think the reason I would take this one is because it has a lot of heart behind it, and maybe it's not as mean-spirited as Mean Girls is, and I like that. I mean, this one has a little bit of that, but for me, this has a lot more fun than Mean Girls, so I don't know. Perhaps that's the wrong answer, and I'm going against the grain with that, but at least I'd have Jimmy Fallon in my court. So there you go.
That's very true. He's a good guy to have in your court. No, that's cool. I think The Duff was a really fun movie. I watched it like you did, just randomly one night. We were like, okay, what do we watch tonight? Not really sure. Heard good things about The Duff. Checked it out, and I did have a lot of fun with it. I think I would have to choose Mean Girls. I don't. It's tough. They're both very fun, and they both have very kind of similar themes in them.
They do.
But I'm with you. I think that it wasn't as mean-spirited for The Duff, and it's a good movie. You should definitely check it out. I also really like Mae Whitman. She's fantastic in The Perks of Being a Wallflower. That was probably one of my favorite movies of whatever that was, 2013, 2014. I can't ever remember, and the book's fantastic as well.
Yeah.
So
and I really like her, and I think that's probably part of the reason that I enjoyed this as well, as I just wasn't expecting much, and I'm not familiar with Mae Whitman or Robbie Amell, honestly, and
you got to watch Arrow, man. Firestorm.
Well, I know he's going to be on that pretty soon. So, what? After watching him in this, he's really charismatic. So, I mean, I'm all on board for him being on that show now. But, I found both of them very endearing. And so perhaps that played into its favor a little bit for me. But I just like how this was a little bit more lighthearted, I guess, than Mean Girls, and was fun.
He surprised me, Robbie Amell did, because I have watched him in Arrow, but he doesn't really get to do much in Arrow at all. I was pleasantly surprised how much I really liked his character, because going in, I was like, oh man, this guy's just like the really good-looking dude. He's not going to have much substance to his character, but he actually did. And I really liked him and Mae Whitman in that movie. So. Yeah, go check that one out. It's probably cheap now, $2.99 or $3.99 to rent. So.
Exactly. All right.
Still got to see it.
Yeah, I think it's a fun little watch. If you get a weekend night alone and you want to watch it, or have some guys over and make a night out of it. Whatever you want to do, Brendan.
That'd be weird, but okay.
Anyway, that should do it for this segment. And before we get out of here, Justin, thanks so much for joining us. This was an awesome time having you on the show this week.
Appreciate it. Thanks for having me on this week, and it was a lot of fun talking The Gift.
Yeah, absolutely.
Guy Ritchie.
And Guy Ritchie. Tell us about your podcasts, and where can we find you on the internet, man?
Sure. I do a whole bunch of TV show podcasts, but I'm currently focusing on The Strain, which is on FX, as well as Fear the Walking Dead. You can find all of our podcasts. I do them mostly with my mom and I. She's the one that was in radio that got stalked, basically. So, but we have a lot of fun. It's the Walking Naked podcast. You just search iTunes and Stitcher, or you can go on filmdispenser.com and find a whole host of other TV show podcasts. The number one that I would recommend to both you guys, I know you're big TV or big film watchers, you must watch Mr. Robot. It is one of the best shows
That's what I've been hearing.
TV.
Yes.
Yeah, go watch it if you have not.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, Justin, for joining us. And go follow this guy. He's awesome. He's a ton of fun. I promise you'll love his stuff. And we really appreciate it, man. Thanks for joining us this week.
Thanks again for having me.
And that should do it for this week's show. Just a friendly reminder to like us on Facebook and Twitter. And you can also subscribe to us on YouTube and Google Plus as well. Just search InSession Film and you'll find us there. We do respond to every piece of email we get. So email us InSessionFilm@gmail.com. And also sign up for our monthly newsletter. You can do that on Facebook by clicking the newsletter tab, or on our site at InSessionFilm.com/newsletter.
And for more thoughts on the films that we watch, you can check us out on Letterboxd at letterboxd.com/InSessionFilm. You can also find us on the Lost at Home Podcast, which is lostathomepodcast.com. Our good friends there have been helping us out very well by supporting us and featuring our shows and reviews there every week. We really appreciate what they've been doing for us there, and we can't thank them enough. And also be sure to subscribe to us on iTunes and on Stitcher. You can also check us out on Jabbercast. They're one of the best podcast apps out there. And also, while you are looking for apps and you are on iTunes, please leave us a review and a comment there. Let us know how we're doing. We'd appreciate some feedback there as well. And lastly, you can check out our Listen Now page, which you can do on our website at InSessionFilm.com/listen-now.
And the InSession Film Podcast is supported by our super awesome listeners like you. Once again, if you want to help us, just go to our website at InSessionFilm.com. You can click on our bonus content tab on our main menu to hear our bonus content for just a small donation of 99 cents. You can check out the InSession Film store or just go to InSessionFilm.com/donate, and you'll see a bunch of information there and how you can help us. One thing that I would highly recommend is checking out our mobile app, where you can hear everything we do under one roof for just a one-time fee of $1.99. You can find that app on the Amazon Market for Android devices, the Windows 8 phone store for Windows devices, and the Podcast Box app for iOS devices. And again, all those details are on the site at InSessionFilm.com/apps. Brendan, what are we doing next week on the show?
So next week, originally I had on the schedule for us to take a look at the film Regression with Ethan Hawke and Emma Watson, from the film, from the director of The Others and The Sea Inside, which I think is getting some potential hype, but apparently it doesn't come out for a little while yet now. So.
Yeah.
And looking ahead, when we see movies coming out next weekend being No Escape, We Are Your Friends, and movies like that, while they don't necessarily look that bad, I think we can get better conversation doing a throwback review, kind of doing a lead up, so to speak, to what episode 133 will be, which will be our top 5 films of the decade thus far. So for next week's episode, let's look to reviewing one of JD's favorite films, which we've never actually done on the show yet, and that is 2011's Warrior. Speaking of Joel Edgerton,
there you go. It's all connected.
The stars are aligning. No pun intended. But I think that should be a lot of fun. And then on top of that, being a bit of a throwback / recap kind of review, we figured we'll take a look at a recap and our overall thoughts and feelings on the summer movie season, with it kind of coming to an end for a bit before we gear up for the fall. So we should have a lot of fun talking about that as well. I look forward to it.
Yeah, man. I have been wanting to review this on the show for a long time. Been looking for the right place for it. This felt appropriate, and I cannot wait. And, I'm just going to lay this out there for everybody that I'll probably rewatch it this week. I will probably bawl my eyes out the entire time, and hopefully I can get through the review next week. So,
well, I think we all know that. So I don't know why you feel you have to have the need to say that.
Yeah, well, maybe there's new listeners that don't know. So,
nah, they all know. I'm sure Tim's told everybody.
Probably. So, I so look forward to that, though. On that note, though, before we get out of here, Justin, any final thoughts before we leave today?
No, I don't think I have any final thoughts. I'm curious to hear what other people think of The Man from U.N.C.L.E.
Yeah.
I have no clue if I'm ever going to see it in the theaters. I'm probably like Brendan. It'll be best to be watched at home for free on HBO. But other than that, no, I don't have any thoughts. I'm just looking forward to the back half of 2015. I've talked to many people on Film Dispenser and just people that listen to our podcast.
Sure.
I haven't been very happy with this year's crop of films, but I think the back half, the fall, it looks glorious. So I hope you guys have a whole lot of fun chatting about those movies that are coming up later this fall.
Okay, what about you, Brendan?
I'll just bounce off that because I agree. I guess at this point, I'm very intrigued by what the fall looks like it has to offer, because there's a nice, diverse chunk of films that all seem quite different, which I think is very interesting. I guess I'll slightly disagree. I've been overall pretty pleased with this year so far, and maybe not so much as maybe other years, but there have been a lot of crap that came out this year, but we also had some of the best summer films to come out in a long time. Maybe one of them being Inside Out, for example.
Yeah.
There were a lot of great ones to talk about, but I'll save the rest of those thoughts for next week's show. But I think it's I agree though. I'm looking forward to the back half of this year.
Yeah, I'm also looking forward to the back half, and while I will save most of these thoughts for next week as well, I'll have to disagree with you, Justin. I've actually quite liked this summer. I mean, I had a lot of fun with Ant-Man and even Magic Mike XXL and Inside Out, like you were talking about, Brendan. And not to mention, there's been a lot of small indie films that we've talked about, like Ex Machina, White God, Me and Earl and the Dying Girl, that's come out that I've adored as well. So I think this year has been pretty decent, at least for me. So
I'll agree with you on Ex Machina, I think, out of those. I have not seen White God. I want to check that one out. I've heard really good things about it, though.
It's great. Yeah, I'll agree with that, yeah.
Yeah, it's very good. Hard to sit through if you're a dog lover, but it's very, very good. I would recommend it for sure. On that note, thanks, Justin, for joining us once again. Thanks for listening, everybody. We'll see you guys next week for Warrior on the InSession Film Podcast. For the entire version of our podcast, be sure to subscribe to us on iTunes or on Stitcher, or check us out online at InSessionFilm.com.